The blood on Clara Everett's cheek had dried in the summer heat, a dark reminder of what her life had become in Salida, Colorado, where the Arkansas River cut through the mountains and carried away dreams as easily as silt. She pressed herself against the weathered planks of the general store, trying to become invisible, as Hank Morrison staggered down the main street at noon, his whiskey-soaked breath preceding him like a warning. It was July of 1878, and the mountain town thrived on silver mining and cattle ranching, but Clara knew only the back of Hank's hand and the cold fear that lived in her stomach. She had made the mistake of accepting his proposal 2 years ago when her father died and left her with nothing but debts. Hank had seemed kind enough then, before the drink took hold of him completely, before the mine laid him off, before every frustration in his miserable life found an outlet in her flesh. Clara. His voice cracked across the dusty street like a whip. "Get over here, woman." She flinched, but stayed rooted to her spot, knowing that moving toward him would only accelerate the inevitable, and staying put might delay it. A few townspeople glanced their way, but most found sudden interest in their boots or the sky or anything that wasn't the daily tragedy of Clara Everett's existence. She was 21 years old and felt ancient, worn down like the stone steps of the church she no longer attended because Hank said religion was for fools. "I said come here." Hank lurched forward, nearly tripping over his own feet. Then a shadow fell across the street, and Clara looked up to see a rider approaching from the east, sitting tall in his saddle with the kind of easy confidence that came from knowing exactly who you were. The man was perhaps 24 or 25, with dark hair that needed cutting and a jaw sharp enough to seem carved from the granite mountains surrounding them. He wore a dusty trail coat over a simple shirt, and his hat was pushed back just enough to reveal clear gray eyes that took in everything with the alertness of someone who had seen trouble and survived it. Vincent Yates had been riding for 3 weeks, coming up from Texas after delivering a herd for his employer. He was tired, hungry, and looking forward to a hot meal and a clean bed, but the scene unfolding before him stopped those thoughts cold. He recognized the particular way the woman held herself, that combination of fear and resignation that spoke of long suffering. He recognized, too, the swaying stance of the drunk and the way other people seemed to evaporate from the street. Hank reached Clara and grabbed her arm hard enough to make her gasp. "Didn't you hear me calling you? You deaf as well as stupid." "I heard you," Clara said quietly, her voice carefully neutral. "I was just nothing." Hank raised his hand and Clara closed her eyes, bracing for the blow that everyone pretended not to see. But it never came. Instead, she heard a different sound, boots hitting the dirt, spurs jangling, and then Hank's startled yelp. Her eyes flew open to see the stranger's hand locked around Hank's wrist, holding it suspended in the air. "That's no way to treat a lady," Vincent said, his voice calm but carrying an edge that suggested calmness was a choice, not a limitation. Hank tried to wrench his arm free and failed. "This ain't your business, Cowboy. That's my woman, and I'll treat her how I see fit." "See, that's where you're wrong," Vincent replied, still holding Hank's wrist with seemingly no effort. "When a man raises his hand to a woman in front of me, it becomes my business. Let go of me." Hank's face flushed purple with rage and humiliation. A crowd was forming now, drawn by the promise of confrontation. In a town where entertainment was scarce, even tragedy became spectacle. Vincent released Hank's wrist and took a step back, giving the drunk room but staying between him and Clara. "Walk away. Sleep it off." Hank's alcohol-soaked brain processed this as a challenge to his manhood, his authority, everything he had left after the drink took everything else. He swung wildly at Vincent, a looping punch that telegraphed itself so obviously that even the gathering children could have dodged it. Vincent simply moved his head 6 inches to the left, and Hank's momentum carried him stumbling forward. "Don't do this," Vincent said, and Clara heard genuine weariness in his voice, as if he had played out this scene too many times before and knew exactly how it would end. But Hank was beyond reason, beyond anything except the fury of his own inadequacy. He charged at Vincent like a bull, and this time the cowboy didn't simply dodge. He caught Hank's shoulder, used the drunk's momentum against him, and steered him past Clara and toward the edge of the street. They struggled there for a moment, Hank flailing and cursing while Vincent moved with practiced efficiency. And then they were at the riverbank where the Arkansas ran high and cold with snowmelt from the mountains. "Last chance to walk away," Vincent offered, still holding Hank by his shirt collar. Hank spat in his face. Vincent sighed, wiped his cheek with his free hand, and then simply let go while simultaneously giving Hank the slightest push. The town drunk windmilled his arms briefly, a almost comical expression of surprise crossing his face, and then he toppled backward into the river with a tremendous splash. The current caught him immediately, sweeping him downstream while he sputtered and cursed and flailed at the water. "He'll wash up a quarter-mile down at the bend," someone in the crowd observed helpfully. "Always do." Vincent turned back to Clara, who stood frozen where he had left her, one hand pressed to her mouth and her eyes wide with shock. He approached slowly, the way you might approach a spooked horse, and when he got close enough he could see the full extent of her injuries. The split lip, mostly healed. The bruise on her cheekbone, yellowing with age. The finger marks on her arm, 5 distinct shadows in the shape of Hank's grip. "Madam," he said gently, removing his hat. "Are you all right?" It was such an absurd question that Clara almost laughed. Was she all right? She had not been all right for 2 years, not since she had made the worst decision of her life, and bound herself to a man who saw her as something to own and break. But this stranger with his gray eyes and his quiet strength had just thrown Hank in the river, had just done what no one else in this entire town had dared to do, and she found herself nodding because she could not trust her voice. "You have somewhere safe to go," Vincent pressed. "Family." "Friends?" Clara shook her head. Her only aunt had died last winter, and her friends had gradually drifted away, made uncomfortable by the evidence of Hank's abuse or perhaps by her failure to leave him, as if leaving were that simple when you had nothing and nowhere and no one. Vincent looked at the crowd, which was already dispersing now that the entertainment had ended. He looked at the woman before him, this slight creature with hair the color of honey and eyes that might have been beautiful before fear took up permanent residence in them. He thought about the hot meal waiting at the hotel, the clean bed, the simple pleasures of rest and solitude. Then he thought about leaving her here, about riding out tomorrow and eventually hearing that Hank Morrison had come back and finished what he had started. "I have a homestead," he heard himself say. 3 days' ride north, up in the high country near Leadville. It's not much, but it's solid and safe. You're welcome to stay there until you figure out what comes next." Clara stared at him as if he had just offered her the moon. I can't." "You can," Vincent said simply. "Question is whether you want to. I won't force anything on you, madam, but if you stay here he's coming back, and next time might be worse than all the times before." She knew he was right. She had known for months that eventually Hank would go too far, that one day his fists would not stop, and she would become another sad story whispered in the general store. But knowing and doing were different things, separated by a chasm of fear and inertia and the terrible weight of having nowhere else to go. "I don't even know your name," she whispered. "Vincent Yates. I work cattle mostly, but I've been building up my own place for the past 3 years." Like I said, it's not much, but it's honest, Clara Everett. She touched her face self-consciously, aware of how she must look. I don't have anything to offer in return. No money, no skills worth mentioning. Didn't ask for anything, Vincent replied. Sometimes people need help. That's all there is to it. Somewhere downstream, Hank would be dragging himself onto the bank, waterlogged and furious. Soon he would come back, and then Vincent would have to deal with him again, possibly permanently. The thought did not frighten him, but it wearied him. He had not come to Salida looking for trouble, but trouble seemed to find him regardless of his preferences. "All right," Clara said, and the words felt like jumping off a cliff, like that moment of commitment when there was no going back. "All right, I'll go with you." Vincent nodded and settled his hat back on his head. "We should leave now, before he dries off. Do you need to collect anything from wherever you're staying?" Clara thought of the miserable room above the saloon where Hank spent more time drinking than sleeping, the thin pallet she slept on in the corner, the single dress she owned besides the one she was wearing. Nothing there was worth going back for, nothing she could not live without. "No," she said. "There's nothing I need." They walked to where Vincent's horse waited, a patient bay gelding with intelligent eyes. Vincent swung into the saddle, then reached down to help Clara up behind him. She hesitated for just a moment before taking his hand, and then she was seated behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance, closer to this stranger than she had been to any one kind in longer than she could remember. As they rode out of Salida, heading north into the mountains, Clara looked back only once. She saw the town spread out along the river, saw the people going about their business as if nothing remarkable had happened, as if the trajectory of her entire life had not just changed in the space of a few heartbeats. She saw the saloon where Hank was probably heading right now, telling his version of the story to anyone who would listen. She saw all of it falling away behind her, growing smaller and less significant with every step the horse took. Then she turned forward, pressed her cheek against Vincent's back, and let herself believe that maybe, possibly, she was riding toward something better. The mountains rose around them like cathedral walls, pine-covered and ancient, and the air grew cooler as they climbed. Vincent kept the pace easy, aware of his double burden and the strain it placed on his horse. They did not speak much during that first day of riding. Occasionally, he would point out a landmark or warn her about a rough patch of trail, and she would murmur acknowledgement, but mostly they traveled in silence. It was not an uncomfortable silence, though. Clara had grown accustomed to terrible silences, the kind where Hank was thinking up new cruelties or stewing in his drunken resentments. This was different. This was the silence of two people who had found themselves in unexpected circumstances and were still figuring out what to make of it. They stopped for the night near a stream, high enough into the mountains that the summer heat was just a memory. Vincent helped Clara down from the horse, his hands careful on her waist, and then set about making camp with the efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. He built a small fire, laid out his bedroll, and produced a tin of beans and some hardtack from his saddlebags. "Not much of a supper," he apologized, setting the beans to warm over the flames. "It's fine," Clara said, and meant it. She sat on a fallen log and watched him work, this man who had inserted himself into her nightmare and somehow pulled her out of it. He moved with economy and grace, nothing wasted, and she found herself wondering about him. Where did he come from? What had brought him to Salida on that particular day? Did he make a habit of rescuing women from violent drunks, or had she simply been lucky? "Can I ask you something?" she said finally, as he handed her a plate of beans and a piece of hardtack. "Sure." He settled on the ground across from her, his own plate balanced on his knees. "Why did you help me? You don't know me. You didn't owe me anything." Vincent chewed thoughtfully before answering. "My mother," he said at last. "She married a man who hit her. My father died when I was small, and she thought she needed someone to provide for us. Turned out what we needed was to be left alone, but by the time she figured that out, she was trapped, or thought she was." "What happened?" Clara asked softly. "She finally left him when I was 14. Took my sister and me and just walked out one night while he was passed out drunk. We had nothing, and it was hard for a long time, but it was better than staying. She taught me that some things are worth standing up against, no matter the cost. Where is she now? She died 5 years ago." "Fever took her." Vincent stared into the fire, his expression distant. "But before she went, she told me she never regretted leaving, not for a single day. Even with all the hardship, even with how we struggled, it was better than living in fear." Clara felt tears prickling at her eyes and blinked them away. "I wanted to leave. So many times I thought about it, but I had nowhere to go, and Hank said he would find me, that I belonged to him." "You don't belong to anyone," Vincent said, meeting her gaze across the fire. "You're your own person. Maybe you need help getting back on your feet, and that's all right. We all need help sometimes, but you're not property and you're not trapped. Not anymore." They finished their meal in silence, and then Vincent banked the fire and stood up. "You take the bedroll," he said. "I'll sleep by the fire." "I can't take your bed," Clara protested. "You can and you will. It's not up for debate." His tone was gentle but firm, and she realized he was not going to budge on this point. She lay down on the bedroll, which still held the warmth of the day and smelled like leather and pine and something distinctly masculine. Above her, the stars spread out in their millions, undimmed by any town lights this far into the wilderness. She could hear the stream murmuring nearby, the crackle of the dying fire, and the steady rhythm of Vincent's breathing as he settled himself on the ground. For the first time in 2 years, Clara fell asleep without fear. They rose with the dawn and continued their journey north, following trails that climbed ever higher into the mountains. The second day was harder than the first, the path steeper and more treacherous, but Vincent navigated it with confidence. Clara found herself relaxing against his back, her arms around his waist, and she noticed things she had been too numb to see before. The way the sunlight filtered through the pine needles, the flash of a deer bounding away through the undergrowth. The pure, cold taste of the air this far from civilization. "Tell me about your homestead," she said during a rest stop, while Vincent let his horse drink from a stream. "It's in a valley between 2 peaks," he said, and she heard the pride in his voice. "Got a stream running through it year-round, good grass for cattle. I've built a cabin, small but solid. 1 room downstairs, a loft above for sleeping. There's a barn for the animals and a chicken coop I finished last spring. You have cattle there now, about 30 head. I've been building the herd slowly, buying when I can afford it, trading work for stock. Eventually I want to run 100, maybe more if the grass holds out." He helped her back onto the horse, his hands steady on her waist. "It's a hard life, but it's mine. Nobody tells me what to do or when to do it. After growing up with my stepfather's rages and then working for other men all my life, that freedom is worth more than gold." Clara understood that sentiment more than he knew. The idea of a life where she made her own choices, where she was not walking on eggshells or reading someone else's mood to gauge her safety, seemed almost too good to be true. That night, they camped in a meadow carpeted with wildflowers, purple lupines and yellow paintbrush swaying in the evening breeze. Vincent caught 2 fish from a nearby stream and cooked them over the fire, and Clara thought they were the most delicious things she had ever tasted. Maybe it was the mountain air, or maybe it was the absence of fear, but food seemed to actually have flavor again. "What will you do?" Vincent asked as they ate. After you've had time to rest and think, I mean. Do you have plans? Clara had been asking herself the same question. I don't know. I can read and write, do basic arithmetic. I can cook and sew, keep a house. But I don't know if that's enough to make a living on my own. It's more than enough, Vincent said. Leadville's a booming mining town full of people with money and no time to take care of themselves. You could find work easy enough, either in one of the hotels or as a housekeeper for some mine owner. Or, he paused, looking uncertain for the first time since she had met him. Or what? Or you could stay at the homestead. Help me with the place in exchange for room and board until you figure out what you want to do next. There's plenty of work for 2 people, more than I can manage alone if I'm being honest, and it might give you time to heal up, get your strength back. Clara studied him across the fire, trying to read his intentions. But she saw only sincerity in his face, none of the calculation or cruelty she had learned to recognize in Hank. Still, she had learned to be careful, to question generosity because it so often came with strings attached. What would you want in return? She asked carefully. Vincent looked confused. I just told you, help with the homestead. Mending, cooking, tending the chickens, that sort of thing. Why, what did you think I meant? Clara felt her face flush with embarrassment and shame. I'm sorry, Hank always said that kindness was just another word for expecting something later. I know that's not true, but it's hard to shake that kind of thinking. I understand, Vincent said, and his voice was kind. But I'm not Hank, and I'm not asking you for anything except honest work in exchange for a roof and food. What you do beyond that, where you go, what you decide, that's all your choice. You hear me? Your choice. She heard him, and more than that, she believed him. There was something fundamentally decent about Vincent Yates, something solid and trustworthy that she recognized on an instinctive level. Maybe it was foolish to trust him so quickly, but then again, she had trusted Hank slowly over months of courtship, and look where that had gotten her. Perhaps gut instinct was as good a guide as any. All right, she said. I'll help you with the homestead, at least for a while until I know what I want to do next. Vincent smiled, and it transformed his face from serious to almost boyish. Good. That's settled then. They reached the homestead on the afternoon of the 3rd day, dropping down into a valley so beautiful that Clara caught her breath. Vincent had not exaggerated. A stream did indeed run through it, bright with reflected sky, and the grass grew thick and green despite the summer season. His cattle dotted the landscape, grazing peacefully, and the cabin sat nestled against a stand of pines with mountains rising majestically on all sides. The cabin was small but well built, constructed of logs that Vincent had cut and hewn himself. The door hung straight and true, and the windows had real glass, which must have cost him dearly this far from town. The barn was equally solid, and chickens scratched contentedly in their enclosed run. It's wonderful, Clara said, sliding down from the horse. Her legs trembled from 3 days of riding, and she had to grab Vincent's arm to steady herself. Careful, he said, supporting her until she found her balance. You'll be sore for a day or 2 until you get used to walking again. He showed her inside the cabin, which was sparse but clean. A cast iron stove dominated one corner with a table and 2 chairs nearby. A few shelves held supplies and cooking implements. A ladder led up to the loft, where Vincent explained he normally slept. You take the loft, he said. I'll sleep down here for now. Vincent, you can't keep giving up your bed for me. Loft's not much of a bed, just some blankets and a pillow. Trust me, I've slept in worse places. He was already pulling a blanket from a chest in the corner. Now you must be exhausted. Why don't you rest while I see to the animals and make sure everything's as I left it? Clara wanted to protest, to insist that she start earning her keep immediately, but the truth was she was exhausted. The ride had taken everything out of her, and the emotional upheaval of the past 3 days was catching up with her. She climbed the ladder to the loft and found it cozy and surprisingly comfortable, with blankets that smelled like fresh air and sunshine. She meant to rest for just a few minutes, but when she woke, it was dark outside and she could smell something cooking. She descended the ladder carefully to find Vincent at the stove, stirring something in a pot. "I was about to wake you," he said. "Figured you could use the sleep, but you should eat something." "What time is it?" "Near about 8, I'd say. You slept for 4 hours. Clara felt mortified. "I'm so sorry. I should have been helping you." "Help me tomorrow," Vincent said easily. "Tonight, you needed rest more than I needed help. Now sit down and eat this stew before it gets cold." The stew was simple but good, made with salt pork and beans and some wild onions Vincent had gathered. They ate together at the small table, and Clara found herself watching him surreptitiously. He had cleaned up from the trail, washed his face and hands, and changed into a fresh shirt. His dark hair was still slightly damp from washing, and in the lamplight his features seemed softer, more approachable. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "For everything. For helping me, for bringing me here, for just being kind." Vincent set down his spoon and looked at her seriously. "You don't have to keep thanking me, Clara. This is just how people should treat each other. I'm sorry you got so used to anything else that basic decency seems remarkable." "It does, though," she said softly. "It seems remarkable because it's been so long since I experienced it." They finished their meal in comfortable silence, and then Vincent showed her where everything was in the cabin: the wash basin, the soap, the towels, the supplies for breakfast. He explained his usual routine, what chores needed doing and when, and told her not to worry about any of it until she felt ready. "I'm ready now," she insisted. "I want to help, Vincent. I want to earn my place here." "You don't have to earn anything," he said, but he was smiling. "But if you want to help, I won't turn you down. The chickens need feeding first thing in the morning, and someone's got to collect the eggs. I usually do it, but I'd be grateful to hand that chore over. Never did like those hens, they're mean as rattlesnakes." "I can handle mean chickens," Clara said with more confidence than she felt. That night, lying in the loft with the sounds of the mountain night outside and Vincent's steady breathing below, Clara thought about the strange turns life took. 3 days ago she had been trapped in Salida, convinced her life would end at Hank Morrison's hands. Now she was in a beautiful valley in the mountains, safe and fed and treated with respect by a man who seemed to expect nothing from her beyond honest work. She did not let herself think too much about the way her heart had skipped when Vincent smiled at her, or the way she felt safe when his arms were around her waist during the ride, or the fact that she had noticed how his shirt fit across his shoulders. Those thoughts led nowhere useful. Vincent had offered her sanctuary, not romance, and the last thing she needed was to complicate this arrangement by developing feelings for her rescuer. But feelings, she would learn, did not much care what was useful or appropriate. The days fell into a rhythm. Clara rose with the sun and fed the chickens, who were indeed mean as rattlesnakes but gradually accepted her as the bringer of food. She collected eggs and brought them back to the cabin, where she prepared breakfast while Vincent did the morning chores with the cattle and horses. They ate together, discussing the day's plans, and then set about their respective tasks. Clara discovered she had a knack for the small repairs that Vincent had been putting off: mending shirts, patching the curtains, fixing a broken chair leg. She cooked meals that were more elaborate than Vincent's usual fare, using the vegetables from his garden and herbs she found growing wild nearby. She cleaned the cabin until it shone, organized his chaotic shelves, and generally brought a sense of order to the homestead that it had lacked. Vincent, for his part, worked from dawn to dusk on the harder physical tasks. He repaired fencing, tended the cattle, hunted for meat, and split wood for the winter that would come all too soon in these mountains. But he always made time to talk with Clara, to ask her opinion on decisions about the homestead, to share his plans and dreams for the future. They talked about everything during those long summer evenings. Vincent told her about growing up in Texas, about his mother's courage in leaving his stepfather, about his decision to head north and build something of his own. Clara talked about her childhood in Missouri, how happy she had been before her mother died when Clara was 10, how her father had never quite recovered from that loss and had died more from heartbreak than any illness. "I should have been smarter about Hank," she said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains pink and gold. "All the signs were there. The way he drank too much even when we were courting. The way he talked about his mother like she had failed him somehow. But I was desperate and scared, and he seemed like an answer to my problems." "He took advantage of someone in a vulnerable position," Vincent said firmly. "That's on him, not you. You were trying to survive." "I survived," Clara agreed, "but I'm not sure I really lived, not for those 2 years. I just existed, got through each day without thinking too much about the next one." "And now?" Vincent asked. She considered the question. The bruises Hank had left on her body had faded to nothing, and the ones on her soul were beginning to heal as well. She woke each morning without fear. She went to bed each night without dreading what tomorrow might bring. She was beginning to remember who she had been before Hank Morrison, that girl who laughed easily and dreamed of a simple, happy life. "Now I think I'm starting to live again," she said. Vincent turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her heart beat faster. "Good," he said quietly. "You deserve to live, Clara. You deserve to be happy." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Then Vincent cleared his throat and stood up. "I should check on the cattle one more time before dark. That coyote I heard last night might be back." After he left, Clara sat alone on the porch and tried to sort through what she was feeling. It had been 6 weeks since they arrived at the homestead. 6 weeks of working side by side and learning each other's habits and rhythms. 6 weeks of growing comfortable with each other, of casual touches and shared laughter and late-night conversations that ranged from profound to silly. She was falling for him. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Despite every promise she had made to herself, despite knowing it was foolish and complicated and potentially disastrous, she was falling for Vincent Yates. He was everything Hank was not: gentle without being weak, strong without being cruel, confident without being arrogant. He treated her like an equal, valued her opinions, and never once raised his voice in anger. When he touched her arm to get her attention or steadied her when she stumbled, his hands were careful and respectful. When he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she had never experienced before. But did he feel the same? He was kind to her, certainly, but he was kind to everyone: his horse, his chickens, even the stray dog that had wandered onto the property last week and decided to stay. Maybe she was reading too much into his smiles, into the way he sought out her company, into the moments when their eyes met and held for just a beat too long. And even if he did feel something, was she ready for it? She had sworn off men after Hank, promised herself that she would never again put her happiness in someone else's hands. But Vincent was making her rethink that promise, making her wonder if maybe not all men were like Hank, if maybe she could trust again. The summer wore on, hot days giving way to cool nights that hinted at the autumn to come. Vincent made a trip to Leadville for supplies and came back with fabric for Clara to make herself some new dresses, which she protested but secretly was thrilled about. She had been making do with the one dress she owned and one of Vincent's old shirts for work days, and the prospect of having clothing that actually fit and was not worn to transparency was wonderful. "I can't accept this," she said, running her hand over the soft cotton. "It's too much." "It's just fabric," Vincent said, though they both knew it was more than that. "You've been working hard and you deserve to have proper clothes. Besides, I noticed your old dress has been mended so many times there's more patches than original fabric." "But no buts. You've more than earned it with all the work you've done around here. Place has never looked better or run smoother. I'm the one who should be thanking you." Clara set to work making the dresses and found she enjoyed the creative process of it. She had not made clothing since before her father died, and rediscovering that skill felt like reclaiming part of herself. She made one dress in a deep blue that Vincent said matched her eyes, and another in a soft green that reminded her of spring leaves. When she wore the blue dress for the first time, coming down from the loft ready for breakfast, Vincent stopped mid-motion with the coffee pot in his hand and just stared at her. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Does it look all right?" "You look beautiful," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her blush. "It's just a dress." "It's not just a dress." Vincent set down the coffee pot and took a step closer. "Clara, I need to tell you something," her heart hammered in her chest. "All right. These past 2 months have been the best I've had since I came to Colorado. And it's not because the work's been easier or the homestead's running better, though both those things are true. It's because of you. Because of your company, your laughter, the way you've made this place feel like a home instead of just a house." "Vincent." She did not know what to say, torn between hope and fear. "I know the timing's probably wrong," he continued. "I know you've been through hell and might not be ready for anything beyond what we have now. But I also know that if I don't tell you how I feel, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." He took a deep breath. "I'm falling in love with you, Clara. Maybe I have been since that first day in Salida. And I needed you to know that." The words hung in the air between them, precious and terrifying. Clara felt tears stinging her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of relief, of joy, of finally letting herself feel something other than pain. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I tried not to. I told myself it was too soon, too complicated, too dangerous to trust anyone again. But I can't help it. You've shown me what it means to be treated with kindness and respect. You've made me feel safe for the first time in years." And somewhere along the way, safe turned into something more. Vincent closed the distance between them and cupped her face gently in his hands. "I'm going to kiss you now, if that's all right." "It's more than all right," she said, and then his lips were on hers, soft and warm and perfect. The kiss was gentle and unhurried, as if they had all the time in the world. Vincent's hands were tender on her face, his touch reverent, and Clara felt something inside her that had been locked away for years finally open up. This was what a kiss should feel like, a sharing, not a taking. A question, not a demand. An offering of affection freely given and gratefully received. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard and smiling like fools. "Well," Vincent said, resting his forehead against hers, "I guess breakfast can wait a few more minutes." Clara laughed, really laughed, and the sound filled the cabin with joy. "I guess it can." They stood there holding each other, neither wanting to break the spell of the moment, until the smell of burning coffee reminded them that the stove was still lit and the pot was boiling over. The rest of the day passed in a haze of happiness. They worked their usual chores, but everything felt different now, charged with new meaning. Every glance was a promise. Every accidental touch was deliberate. Every conversation carried an undercurrent of joy at finally being able to express what they felt. That evening, Vincent asked Clara to walk with him up to the high meadow above the homestead. They climbed as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, and when they reached the top, they could see for miles in every direction. Mountains marched away to the horizon, purple in the fading light, and a hawk circled overhead on the evening thermals. "I used to come up here when I first arrived," Vincent said, his arm around Clara's waist. "When the work was hard and I was lonely and I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake leaving Texas. I would sit right here and look at all this beauty and remind myself why I was doing it. I was building something that mattered, something that was mine." "It's breathtaking," Clara said, leaning into his warmth. "It is. But you know what I realized today? All this beauty, this homestead, these mountains, they don't mean anything if I don't have someone to share them with. I was content before, but I wasn't happy. Not really. You've made me happy, Clara." She turned in his arms to face him. "You've made me happy too. More than that, you've made me believe in happiness again. I thought that part of my life was over, that I had used up my chance at it with Hank and all I could hope for was to survive. But you've shown me that it's not too late, that I can still have a good life full of love and joy." "Marry me," Vincent said suddenly, urgently. "I know it's fast. I know you might need more time, but I also know what I want, and it's you. It's always going to be you. Marry me and make this homestead our home. Help me build something beautiful here, not just in terms of land and cattle, but in terms of a life together." Clara's breath caught in her throat. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to throw caution to the wind and seize this chance at happiness with both hands. But another part, the part that had been hurt and betrayed, urged caution. "I want to say yes," she said carefully. "I want that more than I can express. But Vincent, I need to be honest with you. I'm scared. Not of you," she added quickly when she saw his expression, "but of making another mistake, of trusting my judgment when it failed me so spectacularly with Hank." "I understand," Vincent said, and she could see that he did. "Take whatever time you need. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you unless you want to. We can court properly, let you be sure of your feelings and of me. All I needed was for you to know my intentions." "Your intentions are noted and appreciated," Clara said with a small smile. "And Vincent, I don't think I'll need as much time as you might expect. I already know you. I've seen you every day for 2 months, seen you tired and frustrated and happy and thoughtful. I've seen how you treat your animals, how you handle problems, how you respect my opinions and my choices. I've seen who you are, and what I've seen makes me want to say yes." "But," Vincent prompted gently, "but I need to be sure I'm saying yes for the right reasons. I need to know I'm choosing you because I love you and want to build a life with you, not because I'm grateful you rescued me or because I'm afraid of being alone." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Vincent assured her. "And for what it's worth, I'm sure. I'm sure I love you. Sure I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Sure that you're the best thing that ever happened to me. So when you're ready, whenever that is, my answer will be yes." They kissed again as the stars began to appear overhead, and Clara felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she was meant to be. This was the man she was meant to be with. She just needed a little more time to trust that certainty. As summer turned to autumn, their relationship deepened and flourished. Vincent courted Clara with a sweet earnestness that made her heart ache in the best possible way. He picked wildflowers for her and left them on the table as a surprise. He made sure she had the best cuts of meat at dinner. He taught her to ride his horse so she could explore the valley on her own, patiently correcting her seat and praising her progress. Clara, for her part, showed her affection through the things she did for him. She made his favorite meals and darned his socks with tiny, careful stitches. She organized his chaotic collection of tools and kept the cabin warm and welcoming. She listened to his dreams for the future and offered her own ideas, and together They planned the life they would build. The physical side of their relationship progressed slowly, carefully, with Vincent always checking that Clara was comfortable and willing. They kissed often, sweet kisses and passionate ones, and gradually Clara learned to associate physical affection with pleasure rather than pain. Vincent never pushed for more than she was ready to give, and his patience was one of the many things she loved about him. One night in late September, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Clara reached for Vincent's hand. "I've made my decision," she said. Vincent's whole body went still. "All right. I want to marry you. Not because you saved me, not because I'm grateful or scared or any of the wrong reasons. I want to marry you because I love you, because you make me laugh and you challenge me to be better and you treat me like I matter. Because when I think about my future, I can't imagine it without you in it. Because you've shown me what love should look like, and now that I know, I never want to settle for anything less." The smile that spread across Vincent's face was like the sun coming up. "Yes, you're really saying yes." "I'm really saying yes." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her breathless, and when they finally broke apart they were both laughing with pure joy. "When?" he asked. "When can we get married?" "Whenever you want," Clara said. "Tomorrow, next week, next month, I don't care as long as it's soon." "There's a circuit preacher who comes through Leadville once a month," Vincent said. "He'll be there next week. We could go to town, get married, maybe stay a night at the hotel and have a proper wedding supper." "That sounds perfect." They spent the next week preparing. Clara finished a new dress in cream-colored fabric that Vincent had shyly produced from his chest, admitting he had bought it on his last supply run in case she said yes. Vincent cleaned himself up, trimming his hair and beard, and polished his boots until they shone. They were both nervous and excited, like children before Christmas. The ride to Leadville took a full day, and they arrived in the bustling mining town as the sun was setting. Leadville was everything Salida was not: loud, crowded, rough around the edges, and overflowing with men who had come seeking their fortunes in silver. The streets were muddy, and the buildings were mostly hastily constructed wood structures, but there was an energy to the place that was undeniable. They found a hotel and took 2 rooms, proper and respectable, though Vincent admitted he would rather have taken just one. "After tomorrow," Clara promised, blushing. "After tomorrow we won't need 2 rooms ever again." The next morning they found the circuit preacher, a kindly man named Reverend Thompson, who asked them a few questions to satisfy himself that they knew what they were doing, and then agreed to marry them that afternoon in the small church at the edge of town. Clara wore her cream dress and carried a bouquet of late-season wildflowers that Vincent had picked that morning. Vincent wore his best clothes, a white shirt and black vest and pants, and looked so handsome that Clara's breath caught when she saw him waiting for her at the front of the church. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. They spoke their vows in front of Reverend Thompson and 2 miners who served as witnesses, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent kissed Clara with such tenderness that she felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Why are you crying?" Vincent asked, concerned. "Because I'm happy," she said, laughing through her tears. "Because I never thought I would get to feel this way. And now I do, and it's overwhelming and wonderful all at once." They had dinner at the best restaurant in Leadville, which was not saying much, but the food was hot and plentiful, and they were too happy to care about anything else. Then they went back to the hotel, to the single room they had rented for the night, and there in the lamplight, Vincent made love to his wife with such care and patience that she finally understood what it meant to be cherished. Later, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, Clara listened to the steady beat of Vincent's heart and felt completely at peace. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" for seeing me that day in Salida, for not looking away like everyone else, for giving me a chance at a real life." Vincent pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You gave yourself that chance by being brave enough to take it. I just provided the horse." They returned to the homestead as husband and wife. And if Clara had thought she was happy before, it was nothing compared to the joy of building a life with someone who truly loved her. The autumn passed in a flurry of preparation for winter, storing food and cutting wood, and making sure the animals were ready for the cold months ahead. As the first snow began to fall in late October, Vincent and Clara would sit by the fire in the evenings and talk about the future. They wanted children. Both agreed on that. Vincent thought 2 or 3 would be good, while Clara laughingly said she would settle for however many God saw fit to give them. They talked about expanding the herd, maybe building a bigger cabin in a few years, planting a bigger garden next spring. "Do you ever regret it?" Vincent asked one evening. "Leaving Salida with a stranger, coming all the way up here to the middle of nowhere?" "Never," Clara said firmly. "Not for one single second. Do you regret throwing Hank in the river?" "Only that I didn't do it sooner," Vincent replied, and they both laughed. The winter was hard, as winters in the mountains always were, but they weathered it together. They were snowed in for weeks at a time, but they did not mind. They had each other, and that was enough. Vincent taught Clara to play checkers, and she taught him some of the songs her mother had sung to her as a child. They read together from the few books Vincent owned, taking turns reading aloud by the firelight. They made love and talked and simply enjoyed being together, sealed away from the world in their own private sanctuary. Spring came eventually, as it always did, and with it brought new life to the valley. The cattle dropped their calves, the chickens laid more eggs, and Clara began to suspect she might be carrying new life as well. She waited until she was sure before telling Vincent, and when she finally did, on a warm May evening with the windows open and the smell of pine on the breeze, he was so overjoyed that he picked her up and spun her around until she laughingly begged him to stop. "We're going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We're going to be parents." "We are," Clara confirmed, her hand on her still flat belly. "In about 6 months, if my calculations are correct, maybe in November." Vincent knelt down and pressed his ear to her stomach, even though there was nothing to hear yet. "Hello in there," he said softly. "This is your father. I just want you to know that you're already loved more than you can imagine. Your mother and I can't wait to meet you." Clara ran her fingers through Vincent's hair, overwhelmed with love for this man who had given her everything: safety, respect, love, and now a family. "We should think of names," she said. "Not yet," Vincent replied, standing up and pulling her into his arms. "Let's just enjoy this for a while, the knowing that you're growing our child. There's time enough for names later." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Clara bloomed with health, her face glowing and her body rounding gently as the baby grew. Vincent was attentive to the point of being comical, insisting she rest more, refusing to let her lift anything heavy, and generally treating her like she was made of spun glass. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she finally told him after he tried to carry her to the dinner table. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I'm perfectly capable of walking across the room." "I know," Vincent said, looking sheepish. "I just worry. You're so important to me, both of you. I couldn't stand it if something happened." Clara softened and took his face in her hands. "Nothing's going to happen. I feel wonderful. The baby's active and healthy, and everything is exactly as it should be, but I love you for caring so much." In November, as the first serious snows began to fall, Clara went into labor. Vincent had arranged for a midwife from Leadville to stay with them for the last few weeks of the pregnancy. And when Clara's pains began, The midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Porter, took charge of the situation. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Vincent paced outside the cabin, unable to stand being inside but unable to go far in case Clara needed him. Every cry of pain that escaped the cabin walls felt like a knife to his heart, and he cursed his helplessness. Finally, as the sun was setting on that November day, he heard a new sound, the thin, outraged wail of a newborn baby. He burst into the cabin to find Mrs. Porter cleaning a red-faced, screaming infant while Clara lay exhausted but smiling on the bed. "You have a son," Clara said, her voice weak but full of joy. "A healthy baby boy." Vincent approached the bed as if in a dream. Mrs. Porter placed the now swaddled baby in his arms, and Vincent looked down into the tiny, scrunched face of his son. The baby had stopped crying and was looking up at him with unfocused blue eyes, one tiny fist waving in the air. "Hello, son," Vincent whispered, and felt tears streaming down his face. "Welcome to the world." They named him William Thomas Yates, after Vincent's father and Clara's father respectively, and called him Billy for short. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, and watching him grow became their greatest joy. Clara recovered quickly from the birth, and soon the cabin rang with Billy's cries and gurgles and, eventually, his laughter. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. The homestead prospered as Vincent and Clara worked together to build it into something substantial. The herd grew to nearly 100 head, requiring them to hire help during roundup season. They added on to the cabin, creating a separate bedroom downstairs and expanding the loft into 2 rooms for children. Billy was joined by a sister, Margaret Rose, when he was 3 years old. Maggie, as they called her, had her mother's blonde hair and her father's gray eyes, and from the moment she could walk, she was getting into everything. 2 years after Maggie came another boy, Robert James, who was quieter than his siblings but just as loved. The cabin that had once seemed spacious for 2 now rang with the noise and chaos of a family, and Vincent and Clara would not have had it any other way. They raised their children with love and discipline, teaching them the value of hard work and kindness, the importance of education even out here in the wilderness, and the fundamental truth that family was everything. Billy grew into a capable young man who loved working with the cattle just like his father. Maggie was smart as a whip and kept the family accounts from the time she was 10 years old, her neat figures tracking every cent that came in or went out. Robert had a gift with horses, able to gentle even the wildest Mustang with patience and soft words. Clara's hair gained threads of silver, and laugh lines appeared at the corners of Vincent's eyes, but their love for each other never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared struggles and joys, by the life they had built together from nothing. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, they would sit on the porch and watch the stars come out over the mountains. Vincent would take Clara's hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice, and they would sit in comfortable silence. "Do you remember the day we met?" Clara asked one such evening. They were in their 40s now, their children grown or nearly so, and the homestead was everything they had dreamed it would be. "Every detail," Vincent replied. "You were standing against the wall of the general store trying to make yourself invisible. You had a split lip and a bruise on your cheek, and you looked so scared and so brave at the same time. I thought you were going to get yourself killed, interfering like that. Hank was mean when he was drunk, and you were just one man against him. I couldn't walk away," Vincent said simply. "Not when I saw what he was doing to you. My mother wouldn't have forgiven me, and more importantly, I wouldn't have forgiven myself. I'm glad you didn't walk away. I'm glad you threw him in the river and brought me here and gave me a chance at a real life." Clara squeezed his hand. "I've been so happy, Vincent. Happier than I ever thought possible." "Me too," Vincent said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "You made my house a home, Clara. You gave me a family and a purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me everything that matters." They sat together as the stars wheeled overhead. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the wreckage of the past. The valley spread out below them, peaceful and serene, and in the cabin behind them their children slept safely, unaware of the sacrifices and struggles that had brought them into being. Billy eventually took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch, allowing Vincent to slow down a bit as age crept up on him. He married a girl from Leadville, a sweet-natured young woman named Sarah, and brought her back to the homestead to start their own family. Vincent and Clara helped them build a second cabin on the property, creating a compound where the family could stay together while still having their own space. Maggie surprised everyone by deciding to become a teacher. She moved to Leadville and opened a school for the miners' children, determined to give them opportunities she felt were often lacking in the rough mining town. She never married, claiming she was too busy with her work, but she came home often to visit and always brought books and news from the wider world. Robert took after his father in his quiet competence and his way with animals. He fell in love with the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a spirited girl named Lucy, and they married when Robert was 22. They stayed on the homestead, building their cabin on the far side of the valley, and Robert became invaluable in training the horses that the family sold to supplement their cattle income. Clara and Vincent watched their family grow and flourish with profound satisfaction. They had started with nothing but hope and determination, and they had built an empire not of wealth or power, but of love and family and honest work. The Yates homestead became known throughout the region for its quality cattle and well-trained horses. But more than that, it was known as a place where family came first, and hospitality was freely offered. Years continued to pass, marked by births and deaths, by good seasons and hard ones, by all the ordinary joys and sorrows that make up a life. Vincent's hair went white, and Clara's hands became gnarled with arthritis, but they still held hands every evening on the porch, still talked through their days and their dreams, still loved each other with the same intensity they had felt as young people just starting out. They celebrated their 30th anniversary with all their children and grandchildren gathered around them. Billy's children were starting to have children of their own, making Vincent and Clara great-grandparents, a fact that delighted them endlessly. There was a feast and music and dancing, and at the end of it, Vincent stood up and cleared his throat to speak. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, and everyone laughed because this was well known. "But I wanted to say something tonight about the woman I married 30 years ago. Clara, when I met you, you were at the lowest point of your life. But you were also the bravest person I had ever seen, because you chose to take a chance on a stranger and on yourself. You chose to leave behind everything you knew and take a risk on a better future. And I'm grateful every single day that you made that choice." Clara was crying openly now, and half the people in the room were joining her. "You've given me everything that matters," Vincent continued. "A home, a family, a purpose, and most of all, your love. You've made me a better man than I would have been without you, and I hope I've given you even a fraction of the happiness you've given me." He raised his glass. "To Clara, the love of my life, the mother of my children, and the bravest person I know, may we have many more years together." "To Clara." Everyone chorused, raising their own glasses. Later that night, after everyone had left and it was just the two of them again, Clara and Vincent walked out to their favorite spot on the porch. The valley was dark except for the scattered lights of their children's homes, and the stars were brilliant overhead. "Thank you for that speech," Clara said, leaning against Vincent's shoulder. "You made me cry in front of everyone." "You needed to hear it," Vincent said. "And they needed to hear it too. Sometimes I worry that they don't know the full story of where we came from, what we overcame to get here." "They know enough," Clara assured him. "They know we love each other and we love them. That's the important part. Still, maybe we should write it all down. So after we're gone, they'll know the truth of it. How I threw a drunk in the river and gained the love of my life." Clara laughed. "That's one way to describe it. Though you should probably include the part about how you brought me here and treated me with respect, and gave me time to heal and didn't expect anything in return." "Those parts are important too," Vincent agreed. They stood together in the darkness, holding each other the way they had done 1,000 times before, and Clara thought about the strange path her life had taken. If someone had told her, that day in Salida when she was pressed against the wall of the general store, that she would end up here surrounded by children and grandchildren, secure and loved and happy, she would never have believed it. The journey from there to here had seemed impossible, the distance too great to bridge. But Vincent had thrown Hank Morrison in the river, had taken her home, and had shown her that impossible things happened every day. He had given her not just safety but love, not just shelter but a home, not just survival but a life worth living, and she had taken what he offered and built something beautiful with it. Together, they had created a family and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. Their children would tell their children about Grandpa Vincent and Grandma Clara, about the homestead they carved out of the wilderness, about the love that had sustained them through everything. It was a good story, Clara thought. A hard story in some ways with painful beginnings, but a good one. And most importantly, it was true. Vincent and Clara lived to see their great-grandchildren grow, lived to celebrate 50 years of marriage in that same valley where they had started their life together. They aged gracefully, their love for each other a constant that everyone around them could rely on. When Vincent's strength finally began to fail in his 72nd year, Clara was by his side every moment, just as he had been by hers through childbirth and illness and all the challenges of life. And when the time came for him to leave, he did so peacefully, in the cabin he had built with his own hands, surrounded by the family he and Clara had created, holding the hand of the woman who had been his whole world for over 50 years. Clara lived another 5 years after Vincent, long enough to see her first great-great-grandchild born, long enough to pass down the stories and wisdom of a life well lived. And when she finally closed her eyes for the last time, she did so with a smile on her face, knowing she was going to join the man she loved. They buried her next to Vincent on the hill above the homestead, where they had stood so many times to watch the sunset paint the mountains gold. And on their shared headstone, their children inscribed a simple truth that summed up everything they had been to each other. Vincent and Clara Yates, beloved parents and grandparents, two hearts made one by love and courage, the homestead, continued on through the generations that followed, each one building on what came before, each one telling the story of the cowboy who threw a drunk in the river and the brave woman who took a chance on a better life. It became legend in the family, a reminder that love could triumph over adversity, that kindness mattered, that standing up for what was right could change not just one life but countless others. And in the valley where Vincent had once worked alone, where Clara had found healing and hope, their descendants still gathered on summer evenings to watch the sunset and remember the two people who had started it all. The physical details of their lives faded with time, but the essential truth remained. passed down through generations. Once there was a woman in trouble and a man who helped her. They fell in love, built a life together, and created something beautiful that lasted long after they were gone. And if that wasn't a happily ever after, then nothing was. The end.